Today I'm going to go through the tuck planche. So how to train this position, how to make it easier, and also how to make it harder. So to go up and down out of handstand, things like that, into tuck planche, and basically use it as part of your calisthenics, strength training, hand balancing. Now, if you don't have a tuck planche yet, we just need to be spending some time in that planche position. So we need to make sure that you can get full protraction. So what's protraction? So this is retraction. So you see I've collapsed basically. So my shoulder blades are sticking out like anything. If I go in the opposite direction to that, I push through my shoulders up into a rounded back position. So this is known as protraction. Now we need to make sure that on our toes, we can get into a good protracted position. Some people there are still in this position. It might not be strength, it could be a mobility thing. So making sure that you can go between protraction and retraction, and ideally hold this protracted position on your tiptoes. Even better, flip the toes over, go into a planche lean, start to take the shoulders forwards, but still have that very strong protracted position. Now once we have that, we can start to visit and spend more time in the tuck position. Now a good way of doing that is to set your planche position, so that protracted position there, shoulders slightly forwards, hands are externally rotated, and then all I'm going to do is walk my feet towards the tuck planche, so knees towards the chest, hold that position, try and keep that protracted position, and walk back again. Now the goal with this one is to try and keep your hips in line with your shoulders all the time. A common mistake is to load the feet as you walk in, and your hips start to go up in the air. So we want to make sure that your hips are staying in line with the shoulders, and your knees are like walking underneath yourself into that position, and then back again. While you're doing that, trying to maintain that protracted round position with the shoulder blades. Then we can start looking at static hold. So actually holding that position, it could be slight toe assist, but basically hanging out in this tuck planche position. Ideally it would be feet off the floor, getting up to about 20 or 30 seconds in that tuck planche position. Now I'd recommend that you work up to that 20 to 30 seconds if you're going to start playing with it with transitions and things like that. So handstands to planche, you really want to have that 20 to 30 second strong position. So if you don't have that yet, spending time tiptoes on the floor. You could play with lifting a leg up. We could use band assist. Now with the bands, obviously these come in different thicknesses. I can change the attachment point. So the higher it is, the further away from it is, the more stretch I'm going to get, the more it's going to help me. And then I have a couple of choices with positioning of the band on my body. So the easiest way, but seen as the wrong way of doing it, but I think this is still a good way if you're very unconditioned in the planche and you want to feel what it's like, is to use the ankle position. Now this will feel like it's going to flip you and turn you over. So first of all, I'd go up onto tiptoes, knees into the arms. So there's a bit of friction, a little bit of contact between the inside of the elbow pits, and the knees. So I'm pushing against my arms, I'm pushing my arms against my knees. Externally rotate again, and then I come forwards, try and hold that tuck and lift up in that position. Really trying to push through my upper back into that position. What you got to be careful with the band is you don't collapse the shoulder blades and then lift the feet up like that, because that's not going to get you any better at the planche, and it's just going to make you rely on the band more. So the ideal position for the band is to have it around the hips, and again having just enough assistance, not too much. I would start again in that toe position, elbows in, tight tuck, pushing up to that protracted position. So we have a few options there to assist ourselves. You could play with that knees out to the arms and the arms in towards the knees thing as well. So basically if you look from the front, I'm pushing my knees out to my arms and my arms into my knees to create friction between here. And then when I go into the position, I'm becoming like one segment and it's easier to hold. Now ideally you want to get to the point where you can bring the knees in and they're not touching your arms, but that's going to be much harder than pushing out onto them. So you can decrease that as you get stronger, as you get longer holds. Another great exercise is to use sliders. Now that can be a frisbee, a piece of plastic. You can buy these proper sliders. Now to get these particular sliders to work, I have to remove the mat because they work well on the concrete, but they don't slide so well on the mat. So I put my toes ideally over the top, so in that pointed position, so that's going to mean that I push less into the floor than if I have that way around. So it's going to increase the load into the upper back and arms. Go into that normal hand position, so external rotation, protraction, slide the feet backwards, and then from there, keeping the hip at the same height, I slide in, slide out, slide in, slide out, and I could slide in to a few second tuck planche, slide back out again. Now once we have that strong tuck planche, we can start to play with the transition. So the normal one that most people start with, or the goal, is to go from the handstand position down to our tuck planche and be able to hold that controlled. So most people are going to run into an issue straight away, is that they can't handstand in that planche position. So they turn their hands out and now they can't hold a handstand, but if they come into their normal handstand position, now they can't hold a planche. So one option would be to handstand in my normal position, and then as I start to come down, I'm going to have to try and adjust my hands to find my planche position. Now, that's probably the hardest way of doing it. It's really, really hard on this floor because your hands can't turn. If you're on like a wood floor or like a concrete floor, you might be able to externally rotate as you come down and like rotate them, pushing into the palm of the hand. But my recommendation would be to go somewhere in the middle. So not all the way out like you normally would do for your max rep planches, and not all the way in where you'd go for your standard handstand balance. Just go somewhere in between. So slightly wider, slightly more externally rotated. So in an ideal world, you'd have a super solid handstand, you'd have a super solid planche, and you can just put both together and everything's fantastic. In reality, that's not going to happen. So another way of doing it is to try and shorten the movement and only just go from like a tuck position. So like a tuck handstand, and then come down into your planche. So that takes away the demanding part of trying to hold the handstand at the top, come all the way down into a tuck, and then go into your planche. But it obviously demands that you have like a froggy tuck position that's pretty strong that you can basically jump into. So I'd have a look at your handstand, have a look at your planche, and have a look at your in-between positions like the tuck, the froggy position, and find where you have the most control in your balance, and then train it from there. But I'd make sure that you allow your body to be a little bit ugly. So maybe your handstand is going to look a bit more like this, your tuck is going to look a bit more like this. I've even got slight bent arms, but then when I come down, it's easier to get into this position because I have more room for error in those other parts. And it just means that you want to separately be working on making a clean, straight handstand that's very usable, a tuck position that again is clean and very usable to go down into your tuck planche that's also clean. So you're working each of those components individually to improve them, and then working with uglier versions when you do the transitions down to your tuck planche. Now if you have the eccentric, then you can start to work towards the concentric, so going up from this position, so going into a tuck planche and then pushing all the way up into your handstand. Now you can notice there that I used a little bit of momentum coming off the floor and I just didn't stop all the way up. Some people find that easier, and you can even do it with a bit of a jump, so I can push off my toes as I come up and just carry on that momentum all the way up. The risk of using your toes a lot or using a jump a lot is that you're not getting much time under tension to create the condition and the strength to eventually do it without the jump. So I'd work on slowing it down as much as possible, just using the toes a little bit and going up. You could make it a little bit more ugly from a froggy point of view. You could work from your crow or crane position and go up. Basically just find ways again that you can get up that's going to look a little bit ugly, but work on a real clean eccentric for the down, and you're going to get some good quality time under tension on to eventually carry over so you can go the up and the down that's super clean. Now I asked you guys for some tuck planche questions, so let's delve into them now and I'll answer the ones that I can. So what's the best way to get your hips higher in a tuck planche? Longer tuck planche holds, dynamic movements, a resistance band. So a lot of people when they train the tuck planche, they often start in like a lower position. So this is often the case when you use like a P-bars, that they'll hold this position. So they're actually coming from like a support position, and that's really, really hard to get up to a tuck planche. So all I do is use the methods that I showed earlier, where you use your toes to come into the position. You can use bands, you could use a squatty position like this, so your hip is already high and then you're stepping in to the position and not having to push yourself into it. Because when you're still building the strength and conditioning to hold the tuck planche,
taxing yourself by pushing into it to do like a planche press is just using loads and loads of energy. Are there other core exercises that translate well to planche training, or exercises that would be complementary? You'll normally find that the tuck planche exercises themselves, especially the ones I went through today, like the slides, the protraction leans, banded ones, and also if you superset tuck, front levers, skin the cats and things like that, they're going to carry over really nicely to that tuck position again, because basically you're doing the same thing but for a pulling version. I've been stuck in tuck planche hell for over a year. How do I progress? It's very, very hard to give specifics without assessing where you're at with the positions, but if you run through the exercises that I took you through at the start of this video, hopefully there'll be some nuggets there, that things that you haven't been focusing on that will help you along your way. I'd video yourself from the side so you can sort of see what you're doing instead of thinking that you're in the right position, because you often think you're in the right position with these type of movements, especially like handstand variations, planche variations, lever variations. You actually don't realize where your hips are, where your scapula is. So videoing from the side and assessing yourself works really well. For over a month, I've been able to barely hold a 1 second straddle and can't progress to at least 2 seconds. I can hold advanced tuck for around 10 seconds. I've also been doing handstand to straddle negatives. Also did a deload recently, nothing seems to help. So I would try and look at the in-between stages between a straddle planche and an advanced tuck. There's a massive difference between the two. So you want to sort of have a position to train that's somewhere between the advanced tuck and the straddle. So it'd be more like a frog position. So if my advanced tuck looks like that, my in-between position is going to be more like a bent leg straddle position. You can also allow your hips to come up higher in a straddle planche, more like that. That's too high though. So be careful when you bring yourself back to a straddle position that's easier. You don't start turn it into a straddle press handstand and take the hips really high. So I would go for that frog position that's in between, where you're starting to extend the legs out in this position, but you're not all the way out there, because between that and that is a massive difference. So you want to go there. Just be careful that you don't go there. So your legs need to go further away than your tuck position. If not, you're actually making it easier, not harder. But just again, video from the side, and you should just think that you're opening out a little bit more towards the straddle planche. And you can also use band assist to help you with that. So stick the band around the hip and just feel the straddle positions and slowly find those in-between setups that will help. I can't lift my lower body under lower body while doing planche. Not 100% what you mean here. It could be that you're in this position and then your legs feel very, very heavy. So all I do there is work on those protraction holds, do the slides, the walking in and out, use the sliders, use the bands, and try and mimic the position where the legs are up in the air, the hips are in the right position, and make sure you're getting a really strong protracted scapular position. And then eventually your legs should feel lighter and lighter. Maybe bring one leg up and just make sure that you're getting tight enough in a ball. A lot of people, when they do it to start with, have their legs back here, which is more like an advanced tuck position. So their legs and their hips feel really, really heavy. You got any hip flexor exercises? Related to the planche, not really. Holding a tuck position. So bringing your knees up towards your chest. There's some flexibility in there. So glutes, hamstrings and that need to have the flexibility to go like into a deep squat position. And that's also dependent on the hip flexor having some strength to pull your knees towards your chest. But just doing those planche slides and holding time in a tuck planche is also going to develop some strength in your hip flexors, because you're creating hip flexion. In tuck planche, how do you increase the height of the hips? When I go into tuck planche, my hips go down. I can't get onto the same line that the shoulders are. So that basically goes back to that other one I answered where it says your body is too low. So maybe you're training on P-bars or something. Do something that allows you to start in a higher hip position, and don't try and lift yourself up into it. And then if that's still too hard, go to one of the easier variations and spend more time there and slowly decrease the assistance. How long should you be able to tuck planche before moving on to more advanced planche progressions? I find myself able to hold a tuck planche for 3 sets of 20 seconds and only 3 to 5 seconds of advanced tucks. Such short holds of advanced tuck seems like it's too little volume for any real adaptation. So this is very common, that people get very stuck in the tuck planche position because it's very easy to make the body one segment. You can really go into a tight ball. So open the knees away is much more challenging. So you could go somewhere in between, because if you think of the tight tuck position is right like this, and then the advanced tuck is seen as being there, there's a big difference in between. So instead of being there, you could go there. So when you're in the planche itself, you can see where that is if you video from the side and see if your knees are sticking through. So you can just see my knees, and my advanced tuck is back there. If I just try and move the knee somewhere in between, and maybe brought the knee so it just sticks out a little bit, so it's still a little bit closed tuck, but it's more advanced than that tight tuck position, and try and hold there in between. You could also work some band assist, which will allow you to open up. And I'd also do things like planche leans. So you're actually conditioning the body to be in more of an open position. You could try entering the planche from more of an open position instead of opening out. So more like that. And even those planche slides that I showed earlier would be a good progression because it's teaching you to hold the protracted position with a more open body shape. And then the last one, unable to lift my legs hips during tuck planche. So again, that's probably going back to those P-bars like I answered a minute ago. So practice with the toes on the floor, get the hips and the knees in the right position, and then lift one leg up at a time, or use one of the band assist methods that I showed a minute ago. Now, if you have any other exercises that you personally use for your tuck that I haven't been through today, if you could stick them down in the description, that would be really useful. I'm always interested in learning how other people train these skills. If you have any other questions that I haven't covered, stick them down there as well. Reach out if you'd like some coaching, www.paultwyman.com.au, and I'll speak to you next time. Thanks, guys.